All right, welcome everybody. It's so nice to see a lot of familiar faces here. I'm John Haig. Hopefully at this point, many of you know, you've heard me say this many times. I'm the co-director of the Mosava Rahmani Center for Business and Government. We have a terrific set of seminars this week, both today and then on Wednesday. The one today, will Europe's new tech platform regulations open the door to competition? And we have Gene Kimmelman with us. And the interesting thing is the Digital Marketing Act went into place, and we are now starting to get actually the burden is put on the companies to file how they're going to conform to the Digital Markets Act. And we're starting to get those submissions, and I think Gene will have a lot to say about that, and they're pretty interesting. Gene has served as Deputy Associate Attorney General in the Office of the Associate Attorney General at the Department of Justice in 2021-2022, and he oversaw, of all things, the Antitrust and Tax Divisions since today is April 15th. Thought it was appropriate that I could yell at him about how much I have to pay in taxes today. 2014 to 2020, he was president and CEO and then senior advisor at Public Knowledge. And he's had various other jobs. And he is also, in addition to being a senior research fellow here, he is a senior policy fellow at Yale University's Tobin Economic Policy Center. I will turn it over to Gene, and I'm looking forward to this quite a bit. By the way, last thing I'll just say real quickly, on Wednesday, we're changing gears a little bit. And the title of that session is, Will the Essential Network of the 21st Century Go Unsupervised? The Return of Net Neutrality. And Tom Wheeler will lead us in that discussion. And when he was the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, he was pretty heavily involved in issues around net neutrality with his general counsel, John Salet, who is here today as well. So it'll be an interesting discussion on Wednesday. With that, Gene, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thanks so much, John. Um, and thank all of you for coming. I hope you enjoy your lunch here and eat quickly because I'm going to need your help here. I want to also thank Hilaka, who helped pull together the materials for today's presentation. And we're going to all be steered by Claire, who's going to drive us through the slides. But before we dig in, I want to congratulate all of you. You've just been hired as consultants by the European Commission for the next hour. You are part of the decision-making structure for the Digital Markets Act. So don't choke on your food here. We're going to have a lot of work to do here together. So I want to do a very fast overview of the law so that you have your assignment clearly focused in your heads. And then we're going to kind of go through some examples of what's been going on in the early compliance that John referred to of the Digital Markets Act. But before we go into details, I want to kind of set the context a little bit, just as a reminder for everyone. Many of you probably heard Fiona Scott Morton last week present on this, who is fabulous, and John Salet's introduction was equally fabulous. So I'm not going to go into all the details of all of this, but I'm going to elevate a couple things that she had mentioned and that we've talked about before. Let's think about what we're trying to do here on in digital platforms. What we've learned over and over again as we've seen markets unfold is that as we put millions, tens of millions and more buyers and sellers in relationships with each other on these platforms, we're getting the benefits of network effects. The owners of the platforms are getting the benefits of scale and scope economies. They're getting massive amounts of data and a whole new value stream that we haven't seen in other industries. And what we are seeing over and over again, before you get to antitrust enforcement and other regulatory factors at play, is you see very little competition of platform to platform. And so let's just keep that in mind as we look at one of the first laws, a groundbreaking law here, that you're going to help me try to figure out how we're going to implement, because there is only so much you can do. we're in an environment where inherently we're talking about few players. So we need to be realistic about what any law should be expected to do, especially when it's just coming into its first compliance stage. So now let's go on and look at some of the key things here we have to deal with. We have a law that has designated 6 companies as gatekeepers. Um, Anybody know? ByteDance? Microsoft? Amazon? Give me some more. There you go. How about Apple? Formerly known as Facebook Meta. Okay, so those are our 6 that are subject to specific requirements now for key services they offer that are called core platform services. I've listed them here. I'm not going to go into these in great detail. We're going to pick out a few areas of compliance first off. But you can see the range of compliance reports that have come in from these 6 companies have touched on all of these functions, and they all have to do a variety of things to promote contestability and fairness. And what does that mean? Variety of behavioral requirements that focus on what I just have laid out as a couple of categories of things. Because we know the power of big data, we want to take away the advantages of that. We want to facilitate the opportunity to switch across services to be able to use multiple platforms at the same time. We want some kinds of neutrality across platforms and devices, a variety of interoperability requirements. We want to prevent practices that lock people into services across one platform's range, its own whole menu of services. And promoting contestability and fairness here, I want to highlight this is about business users. All of us want to be treated fairly in the marketplace. That's not what this law is focused on. It's not about consumers, it's not about individuals. It does obviously have knock-on effects on everything that affects individuals and consumers, but it's about business users. It is about the notion that on a platform, when businesses are having to use the platform to reach their customers, some of the value that they deserve for the products and services they've created is being expropriated by the platform itself. It's being taken away, not just the legitimate cost of using the platform, but more than that. And that needs to be dealt with. And then finally, there's a set of obligations about preventing and duties that relate to limiting leveraging, tying one service to another, making you take a whole package of things, even if you only want one. So I boil this down then to what we need to look for here in these compliance reports is whether they are actually dealing with the choke points that have led the commission to these specific set of duties and obligations. Are we doing things that will reduce barriers to entry? Are we doing things that take away a lot of the advantages that the platforms inherently have, given the nature of these markets? And are we actually getting more fair treatment of business users? So let's dig in. You are now put to work for the next hour. How are they complying? We're going to highlight a few areas. I want to look at some of the key obligations that relate to user consent and choice, some of the App Store duties and obligations, and then finally some of the limitations on self-preferencing, favoring your own products and services on your platform, particularly on marketplaces and in search. So, consent. Here's what we're getting so far from Google, Meta, and Microsoft. You're on their platform. you're using a service, they're using your data now across all of their services, no longer allowed under the law. So here's what these companies are pretty much offering up. Looks pretty good, right? I mean, this has changed. You can actually, when you're in the metaverse of Meta, you're not automatically having your data flow across Messenger, Instagram, into their marketplace, all their services. You have to consent before they can do that. What they're also doing is finding ways to present this to you. So this gets in, we could have a whole long conversation about this, but this is something I want you to just quickly look at what they're offering and think about the user experience. In Europe, this is what everybody's getting. Pretty informative, pretty straightforward. But we have to think about the fact that most of us, when we go on a device, we have something we want to do, right? We're not really interested in like reading a whole lot of what Meta has to say to us about what our options and choices are. We want to get to what we're doing, right? So there's a tension here between the, I'm going to comply by the law and just kind of give you information and you get to decide whether you want to share or not share. But you get in here also are some little hints of what you're going to lose if you don't allow us to share. So there's a back and forth here between information flow, user empowerment, and then our just inherent traits as user. We're people and we don't want to be bothered with all this. So we've got to grapple with that. But pretty straightforward, right? Like, it's up to you. Well, the other thing Meta is doing is creating a subscription model. So we gather all your data. You get to pick whether we use it across services. But if you really want us not to use your data, pay us $10. Well, they've kind of dropped it, I think now, to 10 euros. They've now kind of dropped it, I think, to 5 euros after there was some think about it. But you don't have to pay if you just let us use everything. What do you think? Fair? If it were 4, would it be better? 3? Yeah.
I think there's definitely some element of taking advantage of loss aversion in consumers. So we talked about some of the behavioral basis for why we have this set of regulations. And I think the response here is really, again, taking advantage of some behavioral shortcomings in consumers where if I restart this entire new products, my choices would be very different if I've been using Facebook for almost 10 years and now I'm asked to pay for a subscription.
So one of the interesting things about Facebook is it has allowed people for a long time to avoid having their data used for advertising. But you had to go through settings and you had to go through a number of steps to get there. Now, all of a sudden, they've created a new model with subscription. And so you have to ask the question, what's the baseline here? What would be fair as a baseline point?
So, Gina, I mean, I would encourage everybody to express their views, but I'm trying not to express too many views myself. But it's hard. This seems to me to be a situation where, okay, you can have what you had before, and you're giving up your privacy rights, or you can move to a subscription-based system, right? And I just don't think behaviorally that many people are going to do that. So it seems to me to be a little bit of a fiction. And what's worse is it doesn't kind of lock them into other regulatory structures in other parts of the world.
Yeah, it's a good point, John. I mean, I think, again, for all of us here, think about this, whether it was 10 or 5 or 3, you all of a sudden, I've got to pay. Well, maybe it's worth it to me because I care about my privacy, but wait a minute, is that the baseline? Is that the fair baseline? So the commission has launched an investigation of this, and at least by the fact that they've launched in, I think it gives the impression that, particularly in the mindset of a culture that produced the GDPR, with a lot of focus on the importance of privacy, you ought to start at zero. Privacy is an expectation; it's a right. And then, gosh, do we know any companies when they want you to do more with them, that they make other offers to you? Like if you want to change your wireless carrier, can you get Netflix and Apple TV from somebody or something? There are other ways to give people inducements and new offers. If you want to say, if you actually will share your data with me, it's effectively paying you for your data, right? But starting from a baseline of like, you have the right to protect it and you should be able to get these services. So I think this is where the commission is at the starting point on this. And we'll see how that plays out. So I mean, there may be some back and forth between this €5 too much and maybe 2 or 1, but I do think a lot of kind of behavioral economists would say the moment you have to pay, you move people into a realm where you've created tremendous friction for them because they were getting this for free, and this just seems like a big shift, even if it's not that expensive. Let's go on to the next one. Enough on Meta. So next big issue here is, again, we want to give people more choices here. So there's requirements about the ability to easily switch your default settings, to uninstall the defaults and apps on your phone. Here we have what each of the major companies have put on the table to comply with this requirement. I'm going to focus this mostly on browsers for the moment, but as you can see here, some of it has to do with search. So let's start with Microsoft. They're just saying we're going to uninstall everything that was pre-installed. And they have a search engine, Bing. You don't have to use Bing anymore. They have a browser, Edge. You don't have to use Edge anymore. Looks pretty good, right? Apple on Safari, Google with Chrome, Google with search. Well, let's look a little bit more at Google. We're now empowering the consumer here to move away from all of these preset functionalities on their device. And here's what Google's doing. Free choice screens. Choice screens is something we could also spend a long time talking about, like what's a good choice screen, what's not a good choice screen. A few things that we may want to highlight here. But again, it looks like they're putting a lot of effort into creating options for consumers. It's going to be 12, randomized. They'll shift them. So now let's just look and see what it looks like to the consumer in Europe. This is what you see when you're kind of signing in to Google services, okay? Not bad, right? I mean, consumer choice, like going to the grocery store, apples, oranges, different sizes, different prices. So my first question is, do we have to worry about whether this kind of presentation is what really works in this context? It's pretty straightforward, right? But like, how often would you need to see this to actually think through it? I mean, you're on your phone, you want to find out the basketball score. You want to find out something in the news, and you get this. I mean, really, you got to deal with this. How often or when, or is there some other prompt here to where you're gonna get the right to do this or the opportunity to do this at a time when you're really gonna think about it? Or are consumers ever gonna really be in that position? Is that ever the case? So if any of you were around when John Sallet presented um, um, and Nancy Rose presented, some of the issues around the antitrust cases here have to do with past behaviors of companies and whether they violated the law and whether it gave them certain advantages in the marketplace. When you look at these lists here, how many people are just going to automatically go to what they use, go to what they know, go to what has worked for them in the past? It's like, I mean, is it just going to be this is what thank you for the choice, but I don't need it, I don't want it, or whatever. I mean, is there a problem here that in essence can't really be addressed if there was bad behavior in the past that skewed the market that just will not work through this choice? I just raise it as a question. Does this work?
Sorry, I'm going to weigh.
Sure.
Well, I mean, they're basically baselining everybody against what they've done before, so people are less likely to change. What I am surprised by is that they didn't put Google Chrome at the top of the list or
Yep.
put Google at the top of the list, because it's like it's like political elections. The first name on the ballot always gets more votes simply by being the first name. And so there is an element where it's like maybe they actually are trying to do something.
No, I think you're right. I think it's actually I think some of this is really good faith compliance and pretty straightforward. Um, uh, Now, here's a question. 12 is a lot. Not all of them fit on one screen. They're starting off with, I think, the 5 most used browsers in each country in the European Union. And then they're going to shift to some kind of randomized changing. But again, there are ways in which this may skew somewhat. But at first blush, I agree. Let's go and look at Apple. So this is how they have described what they're doing. First time you open up Safari in Europe, 11 choices. They're going to, I think, stick with the same listing for 1 year. So let's see what it looks like. Pretty straightforward list, kind of like Google, just Apple style, right? Look at this on the right. Any of you use Brave? In the first week that this choice was made available, shifts to Brave skyrocket. I mean, it's small, so it's enormous, percentage increase, numerical increase for a very small browser. But there have been a few reports here in the first couple weeks of other small browsers also getting significant shifts in traffic towards them. So that's very positive, despite me poo-pooing whether consumers really will do this or not. But again, caveat, it's almost all very small companies with very small market shares. So the numbers, the percentages look great. The numbers are good, but they're from teeny to a little bit bigger than teeny. So we don't know long-term how much that'll change. So then next, let's look at Microsoft. This is pretty straightforward. And what you saw before was, pretty much typically what you'd get from anybody else who would want to make sure that you kind of stuck with them. It's like, stick with us, pick us because we're great, and you get all these other goodies in our little ecosystem. Microsoft probably had to go a little bit more out of the way to draw people onto their browser, keep them on in the Windows ecosystem. But now it's pretty straightforward, right? So maybe we're okay there, right? Well, the European Commission is really hawking this pretty carefully, because the one thing they have quickly jumped onto here is that for Apple, they offered a not now option. That would be attractive to a lot of us, right? It's like, I really want that piece of news. I want that basketball score. I want something like not now, please, or whatever. Commission saying, I'm not sure about that. The whole goal here was to get people to make a choice, to give them choices and not just let them sidestep this. So they've kind of jumped in. But I think in this realm, it looks like we've got a lot of pretty reasonable compliance. Choice side. So app stores, this is where it gets a little more contentious. So just as the baseline here, in the past, Google with its Play Store, Apple with its App Store have been extremely restrictive about kind of apps they let in, the kind of things you get to do when you're in the app environment. They have pretty much prevented people from suggesting that you could go somewhere else, like to a developer's website, a content provider's website, and get something outside of the App Store that was cheaper than when you buy it in the App Store. And didn't allow different payment systems within their app ecosystem, didn't allow any of these kind of promotional things. So lots of limitations. So now what we're looking for here in the DMA, the Commission's requirement that you allow people to do all the promotional efforts in your app store using the app they have in your app store. Allow people who are developers to link out to their website so that they can actually do the actual commercial engagement with the user on their website and not in the App Store, but do it through the app ecosystem. Load their own apps, not in the store, but using the operating system of both Google and Apple, and use different payment systems, not just the wallet offered by the platforms themselves. So this is a huge set of changes that have been required. And here's how we're starting to see reactions from Google and Apple. They are complying. They've developed ways in which they're enabling people to promote and build separate app stores outside of their realm. But a whole bunch of warnings come up as well. And one of the main concerns that both Apple and Google have raised is security, cybersecurity, security for their users, security for the integrity of their app environment. So let's look a little more closely at Google Play. We now have this external offers program. They had commissions they charged before, and they allowed it side loading. You could bring your app into the operating system, but they offered enormous benefits to everybody who worked through the Play Store itself, financial benefits to every developer. So almost no one did it. Now you have this external offers program. You get hit with a number. You can go outside and you can use a different payment system. They'll knock 4% off the commission for using a different payment system. So that was their 4% that they were charging inside the Play Store. And there are a whole bunch of these other fees that come out of nowhere. Initial acquisition fee, ongoing service fees. So you get some benefits, you get some new charges. So then there's the alternative payment piece. With all those fees and services, you just get the benefit of the 4% knocked off if you use someone else, but you've got to pay all of those fees. And then on side loading, they've pretty much done nothing else. Just say, we allowed it before, no changes. But there were a lot of complaints about these benefits of staying in the ecosystem. So they're complying, but a whole lot of new fees. We're not going to, let's look at Apple. So we at least get both of them on the table here before we kind of delve into what that really means, right? So Apple basically didn't let you do anything before, period. At least Google allowed you to side load. So now Apple has opened up. You can promote. You can link to a website. And you can create a new app store adjacent to their own. They've reduced their commissions, their fees from 30% down somewhat, a little bit like Google. I'm not going to highlight too much the exact percentages. I don't think it matters that much. But they put in place this thing called a core technology fee. So for the developer, it's after 1 million downloads a year, 50 cents per download. Okay. For the alternative app store, it's 50 cents from the very first download. Okay, so 1 million seems like a lot, right? So pull out your phones and look at what apps you have on your phone, real fast, just while you're here. You have 5, you have 10, 20, 30, 50. Got a lot of apps, don't you? Have any of you ever used all of those apps? No. But you know what? They're all downloaded. They're on your phone. And you know what? Every time you get a an app update, that's a new download. So you get to 1 million really, really fast with not that many people even. So these are huge things just to kind of start off here. Now here's another interesting thing. In the before world, I told you Apple didn't allow you to do very much of anything. They actually offered some wonderful things. For all purchases on an app that are not digital purchases, like just real goods, no fees, no commission, no fees. There's always a developer's fee. There's always kind of the security fee up front for being in the App Store. But if you ever have bought an airline ticket using your American Airlines, United app, or whatever, you ever have your bank has an app that you use on the phone, you could buy a $5,000 airline ticket. Apple doesn't get a penny of that. So they've offered a lot of things for free in the app ecosystem. And all nonprofits get the same treatment too. A lot of good deals too. But in this new world where they're charging the core technology fee, if you decide that you're going to go out and use, if you're a developer, you're American Airlines, you're whatever, or a bank, Wells Fargo, you're going to go use another app store. They're going to start charging you this 50 cents for every download of your app on every phone, whether it's in the App Store or it's on the new App Store. So here's an interesting thing about the world before had these kind of split, and it was only digital revenue it was hit with a commission of 30%. Now it's like, commissions come down somewhat, but you're going to have this whole new fee. And if you're using anything else, you're going to apply it across the universe. So that's a big change. Let's look further at what Apple's doing. So think about it from the perspective of you're trying to build a new app store. And what Google and Apple have is this whole amalgam of a lot of apps, right? So you might be able to find some affinity groups, people who are just interested in the environment, right? And they want to go to the environmental app store or something like that. But if you want to, or if you're Epic and you want gaming and it's all about your games, and all you're doing is building your brand and you don't want to pay the commissions, then you might be able to build a new app store for that. But if you're trying to put together some combination of popular apps, right? Boy, that new fee is really going to make it expensive to launch a new app store. Sure.
Phone? No. If an alternative app store,
Mhm.
the flat fee applies to each install over 1 million download threshold
For the
for
app store
each app.
itself, it's not even over 1 million. It's each from the first install.
Yes.
Which
Yes,
includes
yes.
an
But
update.
so for the app store, it's for every digital service download. There
And every physical good.
and every physical good.
Yes.
Is there also a flat fee if it's through an alternative app store to the developer?
Yes, after 1 million downloads.
So there's two fees associated with the alternative app stores, one associated with the Apple App Store. Is that, do I have that?
Yeah, on the Apple terms are fees on developers and fees on the new app store for the very same things. Yes, you've got it. So realizing that this was a big change, and the next thing we'll look at after this slide will be the worksheet that you can go through. But here at first, Apple said, and by the way, the moment you decide to go and think about putting your app in a new store, or the moment you kind of experiment with a new store, you're gone, forget it, that's it. You're now going to be charged. If you also wanted to stay or you wanted to come back into the Apple ecosystem, you're paying 50 cents per download for everybody, period. I got a lot of flack for that. So they said, okay, we'll change that. You can move once. You can try this other environment once, see if you think it's cheaper for you, better for you once. So they've got this worksheet they put together. I mean, this is really good. You can go if you're a developer or if you're thinking about building out a new app store, I think, this is fabulous. You can calculate and you can guess, how many users do I have? How many downloads do I have? What do I pay in commissions if I stay in the Apple App Store? What would I be charged by Apple if I moved over to a new app store? Obviously the new app stores can go through this as well and kind of calculate whether they think it's worth even setting out a shingle somewhere to open up a business. So this is all good, right? Well, so far the commission isn't wild about either this or what Google has done. And they've launched an investigation there. And it's just because, I mean, how can you know what these numbers mean, right? And whether commission going down, these upfront fees, are they the right number? Is it even fair to have them? So this is going to be a huge area in the initial implementation of this law. Yeah.
So
I'm enjoying watching you guys
This
with a mic.
device. There we go. So we go back to tell us more about the investigations process. So it runs for how many months?
So I was going to just say, I would just do it right now.
Okay.
So they have up to a year to complete an investigation.
And it leads to what?
It leads to a determination of whether there's a failure to comply, and then penalties for non-compliance. And if the non-compliance continues over a period of time, fines of up to 10% of the global turnover of the company. Global.
So what has happened is we have actually just begun a debate on what is reasonable.
And what we don't know, again, we'll can kind of look at this at the very end too, but this is a hot button issue. By the way, I don't know if this is true, but in some of the recent articles I've read, any guess as to how much money Apple is making off of its current commissions in the App Store? What last I saw was $80 billion a year. That may have been just the US.
You say
80. This is a lot of money. So now, I mean, you can kind of understand why, as they were pressured to be reducing commissions and some of the fees, they thought they needed to come up with some other things to charge for. And that could amount to a lot of money. So yes, but Tom, you're right. This is the beginning of a process. We don't know what the kind of back and forth will be as these investigations are launched. And we don't know how quickly the commission will move. They have up to a year, but they can move more quickly. And once you go through what I just described of the potential fees and fines, or even if they're not levied, whoever is unhappy with the compliance result can appeal to the general court in Europe. And so we'll go into a judicial review process.
And just for clarification, so in the legislation itself, there's not to follow up on what Tom was saying, there's not a specification of what constitutes a technical standard or what constitutes reasonable.
No,
right?
no.
And so,
So
this is a process of feeling one another out and defining.
So all of you as consultants to the commission, think about this. The burden is on the gatekeepers to comply with the requirements. And what they have had to do is open up their app stores here to contestability, competition, to allow new app stores in, and fairness to business users. So all the app developers who are in the app store have to be treated fairly. So what are these numbers in the ballpark? Are they the kinds of charges? And then you have to start saying, if you were doing old traditional utility regulation, say, what's the cost structure? What's going on here? Well, without going into the great details of this, all the economists that I've talked to about this say, what generally seems to have been happening here is there's a full review process of apps because these companies, particularly Apple, but Google as well, care passionately about their brand reputation and the quality of their service and the security. That all happens on the front end. And again, most of the economists I've talked to say, if you were charging for that in the way you've incurred the cost, most of it is a fixed cost. There's not much marginal cost. There's not much ongoing monitoring of this. It's like once you're secure and you're in, when you update and upgrade whatever you do, but there's a process to do it. There are people who do it, and for the longest time they didn't charge. And again, go back to what I said about all of the nonprofit and non-digital valued goods that are sold are charged nothing other than the developers' fees and this kind of pre-clearance of the apps. So this whole set of commissions that apparently are generating $80 billion a year, like why would you need 30% of everything Epic gets from a game? Or a mini Epic. One makes $100 million, one makes 10 billion. So you get 30% from each. For what? Why? What's Apple doing? other than making money? I mean, so there's just a lot of questions about the nature of the fee structure and how it's being applied here. But again, so let's go on to the next one. The App Store is just like endless questions to ask. These are the companies that have apparently so far said, we think we can open a new store. And as I mentioned, Epic is one of them. And you can kind of see the logic. If you've got millions of people playing a game, you got really popular games, you do the math and you say, I'm paying 30% to Apple versus I'm going to get hit with this 50 cent per download, whatever. And they apparently think they can make the numbers work that way. I don't think many app developers can. But it's really, really costly when you think about this. So far, there's been enormous complaints from everybody. Again, let's keep in mind, this law is about opening up opportunities for entry. That core technology fee looks like it is like running headlong into a brick wall of what is opening a market to competition, because it is so expensive to build a kind of app store that would compete with Apple or Google with that kind of a fee in place. I think this is going to be a really hard one for the commission. It goes on. Let's look at it from the user perspective. So let's say there are different app stores, and let's say there are new ways of getting apps. The notion that someone comes out to you and says, I can give this to you 25% cheaper if you just press on, hit the link, go out to my website, or go outside of the app store, stay in the operating system of Apple or Google, and just use my app in that environment. I mean, that part is really straightforward. But the process of installing a new app or getting clarity as to about how to use it is going to apparently be quite complicated so far from everything that has been presented by Apple. So from the user side, this may be quite a bit of a hassle too. As I said, the commission has launched an investigation both on Google and on Apple, raising questions about whether these fees are truly compliant. You can see, as consultants for the commission, do you have an easy answer recommendation? In the context of cable television, where you have wire running into the home, provider of all kinds of content, you could call them apps, right? They're channels, or streaming services or whatnot. Do they charge a core technology fee? Do they charge a percentage of revenue from Disney or CBS, Paramount? No, they pay them. They pay them for being on their system. So could it be the case that instead of paying Apple, Apple should be paying? I mean, there's a reason that they're not charging Amazon and they're charging everybody else. There may be a reason they're not charging banks and airlines and a whole lot of other, what they call the physical good world. They're dividing it between digital and physical. But the reason may be that they can sell their phones for a lot more money because of all the things you can do on the phone. That it's the value of what the content providers, the app developers, are building into their ecosystem that enables them to price their phone. Now, Android may be cheaper, but the Android model uses advertising revenue to support it, where Apple uses more the device fees. So there's lots of money out there that's coming in. It may be that the flow should go in the other direction. So I don't want to take too long on a lot of other issues, but I just want to flag for you. Next one, coming down the pike, data portability and interoperability. So these are not fully baked compliance yet, but they're compliance reports for all of the gatekeepers have reference to what they're starting to do here. And I just wanted to flag this for you. Data portability is going to be huge. Your ability to take your own profile, your own social graph, and move it around from provider to provider. This could be really, really huge benefit and open the door to competition. Then there's interoperability on messaging. Messaging will be one of the harder issues, but the ability to go across any social network and have them all work seamlessly together is the goal of the commission. So that's coming. The commission's given the companies more time on these. They're a little more complicated to make work, but these could be very, very important towards opening this environment to more competition. So the last one I want to do in a little bit more detail here, before we can go early to discussing or raising questions, is self-preferencing. This was one of the other things that the DMA was designed to take on, preventing the platforms from favoring itself. So let's just look at what's come up immediately in the compliance reports as it relates to marketplaces and search. Google is changing significantly its presentation around some of its search features. And Amazon has made some changes to what people often call the buy box, kind of featured goods and services for sale. So let's look at Google. No reserved links. So Google, as you all know here, shows you a lot of Google-supported, Google-related wonderful things when you search. In Europe, they're getting rid of a lot of that. Looks pretty good, right? And then for products, similarly, they're trying to figure out a way to present both aggregated information and information from individual product sellers here. So here you have how they've shifted the presentation, and the next slide shows you what you can get when you want to just look at comparisons for hotels. Not bad, right? I mean, a lot of choice. I mean, Google's there, but they're not way out ahead of everybody else. Right? Well, not everybody is happy. Yelp has raised a significant concern here about whether, with this whole new presentation, somehow the way Google programs its search engine, the way its algorithms work, is still somehow favoring Google preferred products and services. This is going to be a really hard one. How do we figure this out? I mean, just by looking at the choice, right, there's a lot of choice. So you have to kind of go into the search engine, right? You have to kind of go into the backside and look at this carefully. One of the interesting things that's been raised is Google ran a bunch of experiments to get to what they are presenting to consumers in Europe. Maybe it'd be nice to know what those experiments were and what the different results were, the different ways of presenting it, right? This might be an area where the commission needs to really seek a lot of the core materials that kind of go in on the front end to how information is presented to you, to the public. So with Yelp complaining and others like it, Commission has also opened a preliminary investigation here. With Amazon, Amazon committed to not favoring its own white label products, Amazon branded products, in its presentation on the buy box. But apparently there are equal complaints about Amazon that some of the advertising is still favoring Amazon products over others. So they're also being investigated. Let's go on to the next. So, Tom, you kind of front-loaded this before. What happens? These investigations go on. The fact that there are not other investigations, I'm not sure it means anything, because the Commission can open an investigation of anything else at any point in time. They haven't given a green light everything else that has been submitted either by these companies or some of the others like ByteDance that I haven't mentioned. So there could be action here. There could be new investigations open. Then there are the issues of fines and penalties. But I have to believe with the kind of issues we're talking about, there's going to be a lot of back and forth with the companies. I mean, clearly there had to be back and forth with the companies even to get to the first compliance reports. But none of this is specified in the law. So there's no procedural requirements on the Commission other than when they issue one of these investigation reports and take action on it, that it can trigger judicial review. So think about this. This is not like traditional rulemaking with notice and comment and, you know, procedural requirements. And it's certainly not like an antitrust case where you're looking at certain behaviors and whether they violate the law in a particular way or not. It's a set of duties and obligations. It's a report. And then it's, did you comply or not? So what does a decision maker do once they have a sense that something is not compliant, doesn't meet the goals of the law? This is what we're going to be seeing over the next few years in Europe. But my first observation is they probably don't do what you traditionally do in a notice and rulemaking comment, which is to say, this is what the rule is. This is exactly the way you need to do your business to comply with it. It's more likely going to be that is not compliant. This is not compliant. It's excessive. It's wrong. It doesn't open markets enough. It doesn't provide enough fairness. Go back and redo it. Go back and adjust it. So it's going to be a very interesting way, I think, of getting to a regulatory solution that is much more pressure on the companies to come up with something. And it may be compliance through silence. I mean, I'm not sure the Commission has to at any point say, we're totally convinced you're 100% compliant. But if they haven't investigated you and they haven't taken action against you, you just do your business, right? So I think that's where we are. So we've gone for an hour. You've had this to think about. I'll open it to questions in a minute, but I want to just say, this is big. And as we saw, some of the things are already significant changes in the presentation to the consumer and in the changes in the charges and fees in the App Store. This will change the business models of these companies to some extent. Not going to be revolutionary, it's going to be changed. What happens here? What happens around the rest of the world? So in our past sessions, we've talked about the kind of cases that have been filed here against all the major tech players for antitrust violations. We'll see how that plays out. But in the backdrop, these changes will be happening in Europe. And they have their own antitrust cases as well. And in the UK, a new law is about to be passed, which creates similar powers to what the DMA is in Europe. Japan's considering a law. India's got a law. I mean, Australia, that's happening all around the world. So I think this is going to have significant impact as it goes. And then finally, whatever happens in 2024 in Europe, I think will be followed in 2025 and 2026 in Europe with adjustments and modifications. And I think the result there is more regulation, not less. So stick around. We have a lot to do. Thoughts, questions? Did you guys have ways to solve these problems? Russell.
Will the new models that companies have to practice as a result of the DMA result in users having their time better spent versus attention maximizing behaviors that are currently done to keep advertisers happy?
Well, if you get to decide whether any of your data is shared across from one service to another service, and you feel like you're being bombarded and you think it's because company X knows 50 things about me because of different things I do, you have some power to affect that. If you can, link those dots together. I don't think it changes the fundamental nature of the way one makes money in the digital marketplace. But I do think it does empower consumers to weigh in at various points when they're fed up with certain things. And on the App Store side, I mean, this may be fanciful, but to me, what's intriguing about this and this idea that maybe all of those fees are really not justified and it ought to be closer to zero than anything else, is that I think apps are the new way in which we're going to see more competition grow. Because in effect, I think apps are a little bit like what cable television was to broadcast television. I think it's a new way of presenting a lot of the same kind of things in a new framework that's a platform on a platform that has the ability to do search, that has the ability to organize information, that also gathers a ton of data, that can use new AI to possibly innovate in ways. And I think that is one of the avenues that could be a break open avenue for either new competition or some of the platforms to compete against each other more effectively, rather than have just Google and Apple dominate in that space. So that's one I keep my eye on mostly, and these numbers are almost mind-boggling. But the amount, you can see the amount of money that is being made is enormous. Yes.
Hi, thank you. This has been great. I'm actually chunking through a lot about the essentially your comparison of cable television versus mobile phones as platforms. Obviously, there are a lot of differences. But one thing that you said kind of struck me, which was coming in the future, which was the idea of data portability and consumer control over data. Are there is there somewhere you can point me maybe to like learning a little more about how people are thinking about that? I know it's new, but I mean, there's just so many questions about.
Yeah, I don't have it. Chris Riley, there's a consortium that has been put together with the support of all the platform companies. I mean, they all see that they have to do this, and they're trying to figure out like how do we really make it technically work. So there is a group that is kind of coordinating across companies and putting together a set of standards that is privacy protected and secure and whatnot. So I can pull that out for you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I've got like 3 questions,
Ah,
but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask.
You're hired. Come on, the commission needs you.
So the first one is there's a lot of relationship of the single or discrete company to the regulatory structure and the government, if you will. There's not a lot of discussion of how companies are looking at this from a strategic perspective, and the relationships between companies. And so in particular, I'll give you two examples. One is, Yelp worrying about, like, is Google really opening up the search engine side of it? And that's a strategic battle between the two of them. Another one I would give you is when Microsoft says, oh, we don't think you need to put Bing as the default. Easy for them to say because they have zero share, right? It's like, and all they're trying to do is at some level open up to make Google follow a similar path and try to manipulate the regulatory body into saying, something that's favorable to them from a competitive perspective relative to Google. So there's a whole dynamic there that you kind of didn't talk about a lot that is critical.
Yeah, it's if you go into the three-dimensional world. So is Microsoft doing that because these are easy gives for them, but what they're really doing is creating a partnership with OpenAI that is maybe more than a partnership, and maybe they're building out their capability in the cloud, and they don't want people focusing on that. They would rather let them think of them as good actors under the DMA. There's no doubt there's a bunch of this going on, and the other thing too, just using the Yelp example. Um, um, while I said all the burden is on the gatekeepers, keep in mind the law says contestability and fairness. It doesn't say anyone deserves to survive in this ecosystem, or anyone deserves a bigger profit, or anyone deserves any particular market share. We don't know where the commission will land on what is enough competition. I mean, I poo-pooed Epic in creating its own app store as not being what the commission really wants. It may be one of the big success stories of opening up app stores, but my gut tells me the commission's looking for more than that. And so that's going to be one of these questions here of, even though there will be complaints constantly coming in, where do they land on, you're just pushing the limits here for your own self-interest, and this isn't what the law is about. And I don't know what that'll look like.
A lot of what you've emphasized in the last hour has been on the effect of a platform on activities that can be defined as vertical to it.
Mm-hmm.
Apps on operating systems, results on a search page, for example. To what extent do you think the DMA could have, or is even trying to have, any impact on horizontal competition in, for example, general search engines, mobile operating systems, e-commerce like Amazon? Is that a part of the focus, or is the big focus here on accepting some set of platforms, but ensuring that they don't impact vertical competition?
I think a lot of it is competition on the platform. I think a lot of it is vertical, but not completely. I mean, browser to browser. I mean, it depends on kind of what you think are meaningful functionalities that could sustain more competition, even if there are not more broad platform players out there that just create more innovation, more opportunities for businesses. And I think the App Store is a good example of that. But I pull out the App Store also as like a bit of a breakaway opportunity that could be competition in new realms like search, because of how they've exploded as the place people go to aggregate on a platform, a kind of a platform on a platform, right? An aggregation point that is in an operating system on a device, but that is in and of itself a real draw. And maybe there will be new things that develop like that. But right now, I think in what they are regulating, the App Store is the best example of that potential shift. But most of this is, again, first slide said this is on top of antitrust. Let's keep going after misbehavior in the marketplace, and let's even consider restructuring. And by the way, if you fail to comply 3 times within a 5 to 10 year period, the commission can come back and investigate you to break you into pieces if all the fines and penalties aren't enough. So there's at least a stick there that could be a bigger restructuring kind of stick. But I think most of it is, let's recalibrate fairness in an environment with very little competition.
I'll keep going. um, so, as I understood it, kind of the way you responded to Tom's question is that this is an iterative process, right? So the gatekeepers submit how they're going to comply. The commission looks at it and says, nope. And it's not as if then all of a sudden they're fine, but it's like, I don't like that rock, go find another rock, right? And they got to come back with another proposal, and there's this back and forth. Um, and I want to make sure I understand, is that kind of the way this is going to work? And secondly, in conjunction with that, does the commission actually have the skill set and capacity within its people to do that?
Well, I think this is why the European Parliament made the burden on the gatekeeper be such a fundamental element of how the law works. Because no, the commission can't lawyer for lawyer, economist for economist touch these big companies in terms of going back and forth. But they can say, no, this is inadequate. But it plays into your first point. I think as long as the companies keep adjusting, like I said, Apple at first said, you're either in our system or you're out. People complained. They said, okay, we'll let you change once. So I don't think they're going to get hit with some huge 10% of your gross revenue globally is, once isn't enough. As long as the companies keep inching towards something that is closer to compliance, my guess is they won't get hit super hard for a while. If it looks like it's rope-a-dope, if it looks like they're just slow rolling the commission, we'll see how that plays out. But I think this is a bit of we've got these, we got the sticks, we got the carrots. Which do you want us to use? Yes, sir.
Maybe you just answered the question. It was going to be a combination of state capacity and the rope-a-dope issue in terms of if you had a crystal ball, right? Do you think that they can play the game and let it just time out, or do you think there will be enough resilience in the commission to fight maybe a decade-long battle?
I think there's enough resilience for the foreseeable future because I think also the commission has ongoing litigation and antitrust against the companies that could have even greater impacts depending on outcomes. And the litigation in the US, depending on how it fares, could as well. So at some point, I think the companies actually are going to want a resolution of some things. And if the regulation is messy and complicated enough and whatnot, it strikes me if I were running a company and I had antitrust cases over my head too, if I could kill two birds with one stone, I would just try to do it. It's going to cost me something, but I can get rid of it. Because I do think the other thing that is going to be hard for the companies, despite all their resources, is their own investment strategies and their own merger and acquisition strategies are going to be implicated here as they think about deeper review on the front end of everything they do. The reaction to the partnerships and even just conversations among companies about AI and new models and who's going to work with whom, the fast reaction of governments to say, not so fast, we're going to investigate this and whatnot. I can't imagine that happening 5 or 10 years ago for any of the acquisitions in the tech sector. I think there's just, so if the companies want to move out and try to get ahead of each other, there's some imperative here to get kind of the government off your back, I think. Yes.
Back to this comparison of essentially cable versus wireless. I mean, doesn't it really boil down to portability? I mean, if I purchase an app through the Apple or through the Google Play Store, I didn't buy a universal app. I bought a Google only app or an Apple only app. And if I purchased an app that would operate essentially on any phone, on any operating system, then whoever was selling me that phone and whatever underlying carrier maybe was offering that phone would have to compete with whatever apps were there and how much they wanted to subsidize the apps to get my business. But because it's tied to Apple, they don't, I'm locked in. Does that make sense?
Well, the lock-in, I think, is a lot more to do with the fact that people single home. I mean, you don't walk around with an Android and an iPhone. You pick one or the other. Once you pick, you're in that ecosystem. So you may say that it's built for that, But I'll turn it around and say it has to be built for that because otherwise you can't get in. So it's the power of the platform that I'm trying to address, and I think the DMA is focused on. And the issue is much more whether someone can build an app somewhere or someone has content somewhere and wants to display it and wants to be in these stores, but also wants to do it independently in a different store or in a different environment, off their own website, whatever. And it's enabling that multiplicity of opportunities, I think, that will create the competition.
And one of the issues here is in portability is that the term portability has been bastardized by the companies to say, well, of course you can take your pictures and move them over to another application, but you're going to leave all of your data with me. So A, you're still letting this original party exploit your data for as long as I have it. And B, you have nothing to offer to the new party when you come over, which is why, as Gene was discussing, we then have to reposition portability as porting your social graph. That then moves you to a situation that you're kind of talking about right now, where you've got something that you can talk about.
And I wasn't necessarily proposing that it's possible, but that is the distinction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because so much of the software, I don't own the underlying software that runs any of this. The experience I have within that software belongs to the companies borrowing from.
All right,
And John.
we're almost at the end, but I do have, I'm sorry, but
That is great.
I have another question.
One more question.
There's one more question. So this may be a little controversial, but how much of this, I mean, part of the reason, we talk about the purpose is to create competition. And I don't want to get into a necessarily philosophical discussion of why is competition good per se, but how much of this is actually in some ways growing the pie of consumer and producer surplus, and how much of it is simply redistributing rents within an industry. And I'll give you an example. So I was the SVP for emerging initiatives at AT&T Wireless, right? So we're trying to create an ecosystem, and the apps are, playing in, and we negotiated in early 2000 an exclusive agreement with Apple, and we thought we might be the ones that would be the core, and Apple would be in our ecosystem. And they said, not so fast. Right. But we did, to get them going and to get us going, they gave us an exclusive. We gave, them an exclusive relationship to put them on the AT&T network. And then we were trying to build a system of apps that could go on that platform. And Apple was much better at controlling design and content. And AT&T, it's not one of their strengths per se. So how much of this is just moving rents around, and how much of it is really, and if I really want to get cynical, I could say this is a very clever attempt on the part of the EU to protect kind of some of its startup companies, which can't compete right now with the major platforms, which are primarily US companies. I'm saying that to be controversial, not necessarily that I believe it, but.
Well, it clearly is partly designed to move rents around because the whole focus on business user fairness is about the fact that a lot of people are not getting their full value from the platforms. But having said that, I think that is thought of as an opportunity and inducement to innovate and to open up opportunities on the platforms for new services to develop, for existing companies to see a growth pattern. And it's based on the observation of the European Commission and Parliament that the big dominant players got there, maybe were wonderful in how they got there up to a point, and then stagnate more. And that you're not getting as much innovation from the dominant players as you would from a more open environment.
I mean, that's what I would expect, particularly after having listened to Fiona, that there is it's not just competition, it's the impact of competition on innovation and technology development.
If you don't move rents, how can you move innovation?
I think that's the right answer.
Yeah. It's the signal to the capital market that there are other players who can grow and who you should invest in. And that's one of the critical pieces of this. Great. Well, thanks everybody for sticking out.